Matt Zemon wants you to reclaim your true self. Matt is an expert in the field of psychedelic therapy, and we are excited to talk about these revolutionary treatments on today's episode of Men's Health Unscripted. Welcome to the Men's Health Unscripted podcast with Patrick and Cam.
We're focused on everything on men's health. Look at your emotional, your physical, and your spiritual well-being. You're going to take care of that and make sure you keep on going.
What's going on, guys? It's Patrick flying solo here with Men's Health Unscripted. We are talking to Matt Zemon today. He's an expert in psychedelic therapy and the author of the book Psychedelics for Everyone. So, Matt, how you doing? And let's get started off. How did you get into psychedelic therapy?
Patrick, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I've got a lot of friends and family in the Tampa area, so always good to talk to somebody from down there. I fell into it by accident. I had some friends invite me. They had hired a guide to do a guided psilocybin or magic mushroom journey. And I wasn't a drug user, wasn't even a big drinker. And I had very low expectations of what this experience would be. And in a single 6-7 hour experience, it completely changed the way I look and interact with the world. And I knew I needed to learn more about this, went back to school to get a master's in psychology and neuroscience, focused on psychedelics, and have been doing this ever since. And just, it's completely changed my view of the world.
Absolutely. We've had a few interviews and a few discussions with some people who have discussed psychedelics as a treatment. As many of you know, in our audience, psychedelics are becoming a new therapy for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and kind of the whole gamut of mental health issues. And it does seem like a lot of people that we talk to state that it does change your world. It changes your perception. And I think, some people could probably go for the mindset shift. There's a problem with overprescribing the mental health drugs like the SSRIs and SNRIs. And with some people, they work great. Others, they do not. And if you know anything about them, they can come with some pretty nasty side effects that don't really seem like a lot of fun. So, I mean, this could be a nice alternative for people who have failed treatment in psychodrugs and also just maybe want to try something new.
Patrick, I really appreciate you starting this off with that. I think there's a ton of people out there who feel like they failed their medication. They were prescribed an antidepressant, it didn't work, and the reality is the medication failed them. It only works in somewhat of approximately 40% of the population, so that leaves a big percentage that it's not working. If it works for you, great, but if it doesn't, it's not your fault. And then those side effects you talked about. 72% have sexual dysfunction, gastrointestinal issues, weight gain, memory loss, and some of the youth who are using them, there's an increase in suicidal ideation. So that's a pretty expensive price tag for these medications. And then these medications were never meant to be decade-long medications. They were meant to be kind of episodic or short-term solutions that then people weaned off, but that's not how they're used in America. So put all that together, and I think we have a population that's saying we need something different. And psychedelic medicine, whether it's legal psychedelic like ketamine, or it's in the underground, or psychedelic tourism with things like MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine. There's a number of things that people are turning to find another solution.
Sure. And we've noticed that a lot of these medications that are being prescribed for mental health, there's a lot of issues because mental health is diagnosed in many different ways. There isn't one kind of depression, one kind of anxiety. There are many different kinds. And some of these drugs work well, specifically for certain kinds of depression and anxiety. I'm not a mental health necessarily expert. I am a pharmacist, and so I know that I'm a drug expert. But we have noticed in speaking to people on the podcast, and then just in my private practice, talking to psychologists and mental health professionals, that there's such a huge discrepancy in different kinds of mental health issues that there isn't just a one size fits all pill, I guess, is probably for lack of a better term. So the next question I kind of wanted to get into with you, and kind of a great lead off, would be, what do you mean by reclaiming your true self? It seems like we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's get a little bit more explicit with that definition.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that as Americans, we're brought up to think about, if I have something wrong with me, I can do this thing and it's going to cure me. So we look for these magic bullets that are going to cure whatever it is that I have. And I think in the psychedelic space, we think of this not so much as just a biochemical reaction. Take this psychedelic and cure yourself of depression, anxiety, OCD, eating disorder, substance use, whatever. And we think of it more as a chemical, psychosocial, spiritual reaction. And when you and as a catalyst, and a catalyst for change. Because I think what happens, or my opinion of what happens in these psychedelic experiences, is that people are able to remember how they felt at some other point in their life, and that they felt like they were enough. They felt that they were loved. They felt that they had they were connected to other people. And with that knowledge, which we all should know, but we don't, or we don't remember, they're able to reclaim their true selves and say, okay, wait a minute. I don't have to think the way I've been thinking. And with this newfound remembrance, I'm going to now take these other actions. And those actions can look like a whole bunch of different things depending on who that person is. And we can get into kind of how the psychedelics work. And of course, they vary from, there's a difference between ketamine versus psilocybin versus ayahuasca. But at its core, what are these things doing? They're shutting down that default mode network. So that's quieting that inner narrator that tells you you're not enough, you're not good enough, it's not going to be okay. Quiets all that. And then it allows neurons to fire together that haven't fired together in a long time. And it really kind of makes your brain come alive. So as we get older, we get into kind of ruts in how we think. And if think about skiing down a mountain, and we just start using the same trail and the same tracks over and over and over because it's comfortable. Psychedelics throws a fresh coat of powder on that mountain, allows us to ski anywhere we want, and that feels good. And then it removes through this process the concept of shame, blame, and guilt. So we're able to look at things that might have been traumatic to us at whatever level of trauma that was for you, and take away that so we can reprocess those memories. And that kind of gets to the core of who we are, and then allows us to move past those events, and then move into this new way of living, and then becomes the practice of integration of how do we keep that alive, whatever happened in those 6 hours. How do we keep those memories and keep that confidence and keep that remembrance in front of us so that we can use it moving forward? It's really quite a beautiful process, and it works. That same methodology works for a lot of what the medical industry will call different diagnoses. And yeah, it's quite beautiful.
So Matt, you said some things here that I'd like to touch on a little bit. So you talked about these psychedelic therapies creating more connection and integration. We've heard this before with our previous podcast on psychedelics, and we've kind of seen it in some research that's going on in Colorado. And the connection integration words are definitely thrown around quite a bit. So what exactly do you mean by that? And how can that benefit somebody having mental health issues?
So in a number of ways. So I'm going to start with just kind of the epidemic of loneliness that we're brought up in a society where we're more and more pushed into our nuclear families and not into a role in society. So we go to work, we come home, we have our nuclear family, if we're lucky enough to have a nuclear family. If we don't, we come home and we're by ourselves. And less of us are finding time to do community-oriented activities. So this epidemic of loneliness, this feeling that I'm alone, is something that many of these psychedelics combat. It's a reminder that you're not alone. You are loved. You are unique, and you're connected to many humans and nature in a way that you might not have remembered. So that's yeah, it's really powerful. The integration piece. So in the indigenous communities, and in whether that's in Central or South America or in Europe or Africa or Siberia, they have, you are part of a community. So when you get when you have these experience these challenges, whether it's feelings of depression or sadness, schizophrenia, these other things that happen, you go through that, and then you're welcomed back into your culture, and there's a role for you. Our society is less forgiving of mental health challenges. Actually, from an outcome perspective, getting schizophrenia in America is way worse than getting schizophrenia in a non-developed country. So when we talk about integration in the psychedelic space, it's who can you unpack these experiences with, that you can talk to and say, okay, I saw these things for the first time in a long time. I remember these things. How do I now change my life for the better to incorporate these things? And for some people, that's finding some of these psychedelic churches. Others, it's finding what's called an integrator, and that can be a licensed therapist. It can be a coach. It can be a existing rabbi, priest, or somebody who they have a relationship with, that understands that the person has used this technology of psychedelics to find this remembrance, but now needs to talk about it, and needs to kind of change the path that they're on for the path that they want to be on. But what I think is incredible about this medicine is that it can allow or help people take that first step. So again, I don't believe these are cures, but I believe they're catalysts for positive change. Does that make sense, Patrick?
Certainly it does. And I think that's a really good point you made there. Thank you for the explanation that clears it up. But also at the end, that's a great point, is that we're not necessarily talking about you can't take these therapies and all of a sudden you're cured. When I was in pharmacy school, I was lucky enough to have some experience in an environment where ketamine therapy was used very regularly. And we saw patients come in, they were given the dose it's called S-ketamine, that is the enantiomer for it. And it's, I believe the route was an inhaler through the nose, like a nostril. And so then they had to sit with the physician for, I believe it was 2 hours post-treatment, just to make sure they didn't kind of lose orientation to space and time and things like that. And the S-ketamine enantiomer, from what I understand, is a lot less psychoactive. I didn't have the opportunity to spend too much time there, but I do remember it was less psychoactive. And some people were walking out of there. I mean, they were feeling a lot better. And I did notice that there were a few patients that had, gone in for, I want to say, a couple of treatments, and they had kind of tapered themselves out and really helped themselves. But I thought, in talking to some of the patients and doing med recs with them, they had said that they were able to discuss difficult topics much more easily and freely with a mental health professional, and really dive into what was, kind of at the root cause of the issue, kind of, rather than floundering around at the top and thinking that something was really disrupting you. I mean, people were really able to dive internally. So your perspective on that, if possible.
Yeah, I'd love to stay on ketamine here for a little bit, since it is the only legal psychedelic for most Americans, unless you get yourself into a clinical trial for today. And we can talk about what's coming around the corner here in a moment. But what's interesting about ketamine is not all ketamine providers are created equal. So I'd encourage listeners who are thinking about ketamine to evaluate what's right for them. So let's talk about this from a few things. So first, you have the method of delivery. So you referred to S-ketamine, and which is it's a nasal spray. What's nice about that is in many cases you can get insurance to cover it. So that's cool. But there's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Yeah,
super expensive.
It is super expensive.
The next most common is going into one of these ketamine clinics, where they're going to either do an IV or an intramuscular shot. And again, that is not covered by insurance. So you're looking at somewhere in the range of $3,000 to $6,000 for 6 treatments. These range from anesthesiologists who in some cases, think of this again as just a biochemical reaction. You go in, it's very medical. They take your vitals, they put you on a bed type thing, they put an IV in your arm, you have an experience for 45 minutes to an hour, you then kind of recover for an hour, and then they send you home. And if that's what you're looking for, that's great. But if you're looking for what the research says, where you do your best is if you have some type of preparation, does not have to be licensed therapy, but someone ahead of time who's helping you set your intentions, and someone afterwards doing that integration that we were talking about a minute ago, helping you unpack what happened. So there are other people out there in the medical world who will do that. They'll give you a package where you'll have some preparation sessions. You'll come in. It probably looks less medical. Maybe it's even ceremonial the way they do it. And then you have some unpacking sessions. Research says you do 4 to 6 of these to start within about 4 to 6 weeks. And then after that, unlike a traditional antidepressant where you're taking them every day, for many people, they don't need any more after that first 4 to 6 weeks. For some, it's every month or every quarter, or just with different episodes in their lives. So it's a very different protocol than what happens in the antidepressant world. But I think for consumers to know, sorry, let me give you one other way this can be done. There's a number of at-home companies that offer ketamine. And in those cases, they're going to send what's called a sublingual lozenge. So the patient, you'll get prescribed from a doctor, typically via a Zoom call or a Zoom type call. And then assuming that you qualify, they send you your lozenge and you put it under your tongue for, depending on the protocol, 10 to 15 minutes. Typically you spit it out, and then you have about a 45-minute to 1 hour journey. And you do that at a home with a loved one or someone there with you. They don't need to do anything other than just make sure that you're comfortable. If you need to go to the bathroom, they can help you do that. That is typically around $1,000 or $1,200 for 6 doses. So it's much less expensive, but it's also much more do it yourself. So those are kind of the main ways that people access legal ketamine in America. And I would just encourage you to ask the questions, no matter which type of provider you use. What is your philosophy? What kind of support are you giving me in advance and behind? How do you dial in the dose for me is another good question. And yeah, what does the experience itself look and feel like? So those are all things that you in this type of consumer world, it's worth asking those questions.
It's very interesting. I definitely appreciate those questions because I think a lot of people, especially in America with our quick fix type idea, is like, all right, I'm going to take this and this will kind of clear out. And I'm sure there are other common misconceptions about the use of psychedelic therapy. Would you mind kind of helping us dive into those a little bit more? I know that, a lot of people are like, oh, those dang hippies and their mushrooms, but I think there's so much more to psychedelic therapy. And really, there's some pretty incredible research coming out about people getting some really great benefit. And I know, we do some things with military, and there's a lot of PTSD, treatments built around some psychedelic therapy. So let's go over some of the misconceptions or myths that might be kind of floating around out there, and then kind of come around behind it and give the truth or the actual facts, so our audience is more aware.
I appreciate that. The number one myth is that psychedelics have no medicinal use. They're going to cause you to be addicted, and they're dangerous. And that's not what the research shows. There's a pretty famous study out of Imperial College London that looks at a variety of drugs and the harm to self and harm to others. This was by Dr. Nutt out of Imperial College. On the far left of this chart, the most dangerous drug we have for harm to self and harm to others is alcohol. I think it's the 76 out of 100 on this chart. And on the far right-hand side of this chart are MDMA, psilocybin, and I believe LSD. So very little harm to self. I mean, we don't have a lethal dose known of mushrooms as an example. They've been used for thousands of years, and typically indigenous cultures, when things are harmful, they don't use them. So I think that in itself is kind of a testament to their safety. comes to, I just lost my train of thought here. When it comes to the safety, then, um, I think people don't understand there are over 300 academic institutions studying psychedelics and what they can do for all sorts of things right now. Things like substance use disorders, OCD, eating disorders, depression, anxiety. It's a tremendous range of thing that can be treated, for lack of a better word, with these substances. One of the most exciting things happening right now are the clinical trials that just finished with MDMA. So you referenced PTSD a moment ago, post-traumatic stress disorder. So these phase 3 clinical trials were on treatment-resistant PTSD. So imagine veterans, first responders, victims of sexual assault, where nothing has worked. None of the existing pharmacological solutions, none of the existing talk therapies. Again, phase 3 clinical trial, 3 MDMA sessions with some therapy before and after, and 67% no longer qualified as having PTSD. So it's a tremendous result for an area that we thought there was no hope. So it looks like MDMA may be re-legalized in America by the end of this calendar year, and certainly next year. We're in that part of the process. Similar results are happening with psilocybin, particularly with terminal depression. So think about people who've been given a terminal diagnosis. They have huge amounts of depression, and the typical antidepressants where they have to try a specific medicine, wait 14 weeks, see if it works, try something else. It's not a humane process, and they're finding that a single dose of psilocybin changes their worldview. It doesn't change the diagnosis, but it changes the way they experience the diagnosis and the way they experience their family and the way they experience this last chapter of their lives. And that's quite beautiful. So hopefully psilocybin next calendar year, the year after, is re-legalized in America. We're seeing tremendous results for things like smoking and alcohol use. And those studies coming back to the forefront. But there were, I'll pick on alcohol use for a moment. Before the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, there were thousands of papers on the effectiveness of LSD for alcohol use. Bill W., the person who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, wanted LSD as part of their protocol. It's really, really fascinating to see that academia is catching up to, recatching up to things that they learned 50 years ago before this prohibition took effect in America.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I hadn't heard that MDMA was in phase 3 trials. So for our audience that is unaware, that means that is one step before being released and being able to be used therapeutically. Once that's released, it will be in what we call phase 4, which is pretty much, it's out in the public and it's still being studied. So just to let everybody know, like the FDA doesn't just be like, all right, this drug's legal. It is still continued to be studied for years after it has been released. But phase 3 is really showing some promise. That means that phase 1 and phase 2 have gone well, which are much smaller trials and more so just testing for safety and efficacy, especially safety. Once you get to phase 3, you really start focusing on the efficacy component. So that sounds very promising for, people who have been diagnosed with PTSD. So I'd like to kind of move on. We've kind of already started to expand beyond ketamine, MDMA, and talking about psilocybin. So what are some of the treatments and uses for psilocybin now, beyond what we've already discussed already?
Yeah, I mean, it's psilocybin is showing all sorts of promising results for those who are really interested in seeing some of the studies directly. Maybe the Johns Hopkins site would be a great one to go to. Their Center for Psychedelic Science is really leading the way and doing all sorts of beautiful things. Their smoking studies are incredible. I mean, I think it's 2 or 3 times more effective than the next most effective medicine that we know. And again, what's wild about these medicines is, and especially when it comes to like a psilocybin, is for many people, it's a once in a lifetime event. And it becomes one of their top 5 or top 10 things that's ever happened to them. and it's makes a huge difference. I know for me, it was not even an intention, but I have not had a drink since my first psilocybin experience. It just all desire fell away. Um, so I can only imagine what happens when people go into this saying, I want to decrease or remove my drinking, and how that can impact them. I'm certainly not a unique case with alcohol desires falling away, where our bodies is like, nope, you don't want that. And yeah, super interesting there. Um, other University of California, San Francisco is doing some great work. And again, Imperial College, King's College in London. It's kind of all over these days. I love the work being done with terminal patients. I wish that would expand to their families, so that they can feel the connection together. But certainly at some point it might do that. Um, and then and then we'll see. It looks like whether it's terminal patients and then alcohol, smoking, the eating disorders world is there's lots of interesting research coming out on this. Really, if we think about how our any of these quote disorders, whatever, I really don't love that word, but anything that we're qualifying as a disorder, it's in many ways it's a behavioral manifestation of something that's happened is one way to look at it. So we had XYZ trauma as a child or at some point in our lives. And now that's manifesting in addiction to gambling, addiction to eating, depression, anxiety, any of these different ways it's manifesting. Um, so it makes sense that something that disrupts our thinking patterns and that allows us to look at that trauma without shame, blame, and guilt would be a way to get to the core of that for us to heal and then to move on. And super exciting, as creative as the researchers are being, it's we're seeing more and more unique studies coming out.
It's very interesting that all of that, but really that you kind of hit the alcohol topic. So something in my personal life, I had some family members who had some drug and alcohol issues, and probably could have benefited from some psilocybin therapy. But we've heard that before. I couldn't pinpoint where, but I think I've heard it before that people who generally might take psilocybin do kind of feel released from that urge to consume alcohol, or that kind of ramp up of dopamine, like it's Friday, I'm ready to go get a drink after work. I think that a lot of people that we've kind of kicked the tires with this topic on have really said that since they have started, and we can definitely move on this to the next topic, since they have started microdosing, or since they have had a profound psilocybin or psychedelic experience, I think primarily with psilocybin, a lot of the people have said that the urge to drink just kind of evaporated and is no longer something that has its grips into them, which I think is pretty fantastic, because alcohol is so widely accepted. And I mean, you can't watch sports, you can't watch TV without some kind of commercial coming on. And a little over a year ago, I made the choice to stop drinking, and it has helped me immensely with my mental health. Not everybody, it's not for everybody, I guess. I'm not forcing my beliefs on anyone, but knowing what my family history was and just things that I was struggling with, I decided to give it a shot, and it's really, really helped. I mean, that's probably a different topic for a different day, but we can move on to microdosing. So since people have been microdosing, they've, felt less compelled to drinks. What other avenues can microdosing improve upon with people who are seeking out this therapy, or what kind of changes to mood could they expect from microdosing?
So first, let's define microdosing for those who are not familiar. So what everything I've been talking about, Patrick and I've been talking about before this moment, is really macrodosing. So large doses of psilocybin or LSD or MDMA. We talk about microdosing, we're talking about 1/10 to 1/20th of the doses that I was talking about before. In many cases, it's described as sub-perceptual, certainly sub-intoxicating. So people who are microdosing typically, or it can go about their day as normal. They can work, they can drive, they can interact, they can have meetings because the impact of the amount of medicine in this context that they're taking is so low on their body. The research is a little bit split on this. So there's some research that says, this is mostly a placebo. Okay. And then there's other research that says, no way, this is increasing creativity, connectivity. It's making the blues bluer, the grays less gray, and doing great things for depression and anxiety. I think it's up to each individual to see how typically it's psilocybin here in America, just because it's so much easier for people to access than LSD. I think that so people are, and then let's also then talk about what are the protocols. How do you microdose? There's two kind of protocols that are standard. There's the Fadiman protocol. Dr. James Fadiman wrote I think the Psychedelics handbook. He says take it on day 1. It's still in your body on day 2. Let it get out of your body on day 3. Take it again on day 4. And you do that for about a month and then take a couple weeks off. The other protocol is Paul Stamets, the famous mycologist. And he says, make it easier. Do it 4 days in a row. Pick any 4 days. 4 days in a row, take 3 days off. Do that for 4 weeks, then take 2 weeks off. So 4 on, 3 off. Every month, take a 2-week break. That's how most people do this. And again, there's the literature is split, but if you go into PubMed or type in effects of microdosing, you'll see what the reviews are. There's certainly a gazillion Reddit forums on microdosing. And it's interesting. One other thing I want to add on microdosing. So Paul Stamets also recommends, he says, look, microdosing is great. It's even better if you do it with lion's mane and niacin. And I don't quite understand how it's better, other than the research that he's putting out is saying you put all those 3 things together and it's not equal to 1 + 1 + 1 is 3. It's equal to 9 or 12. And that's super interesting. And there's research coming out when it comes to dexterity and it comes to memory with that particular combination. So again, my website, mattzemon.com, there's a free guide to microdosing, so you can certainly download that. But if you type in microdosing Paul Stamets, you'll find a bunch of information as well on the internet on this.
That's interesting. I just started growing lion's mane mushrooms probably 6 months ago. I've been ordering different kits and experimenting with it just because of I do work with some patients with some cognitive issues like dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that in my private practice. And it's interesting, that you mention King's College a lot. There's a lot of really great research on dementia coming out of London, which I definitely use in some of my patients to help them. But also part of that was that lion's mane mushroom had such a great impact on neuron regeneration and things like that. And some of my patients have started taking lion's mane extract and things like that to kind of help with some of their neurons. But it's a great mushroom. It's very delicious. Aside from that, it's great to eat. It really provides for a great meal on top of the health benefits of it. So
Patrick,
excited.
Sue, I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that. And this kind of ties back into the reclaiming your true self. That so many of us are taught from a very early age to give up our agency to our doctors. Our doctors are the high priests of our society. But we don't really understand that not all doctors or medical people are created equal. And there are doctors that are just going to prescribe 10 minutes with you. They're just the top level, prescribe a few things, send you on your way. And then there's other doctors like and pharmacologists or pharmacists who are studying kind of holistic health and saying, you know what, maybe there is something to lion's mane as an example. So as we think about as patients and moving away from being, okay, I'm not just a patient, I'm a human in charge of myself. So how do I work with these professionals to first determine which professional should I work with? Not all pharmacists are created equal. How do I find a pharmacist that's going to really care about me, where I can also leverage all the schooling they've had in the way they look at the world to change what medications I take, to understands the way that certain prescribed medicines might interact with supplements. and can help guide me to reduce the risk of contraindications, and can say, you know what, the research might not be so strong in this, but it does appear that some stuff's happening with X, Y, and Z. Why don't you try it and see if it works for you? Um, I think that's powerful. And then also finding medical professionals where you can have open and honest discussions, and you can say to your pharmacist, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a psilocybin journey in Costa Rica, but I take these medicines. Do I have anything to worry about? I'm thinking about taking MDMA, but I'm taking these heart medicines. Is that a bad idea?" And pharmacists, and there are pharmacists and other medical professionals who can help guide you without giving you a prescription, but they can help you navigate the river of your own health. But you have to be willing to ask the questions, and you have to find medical professionals that you trust with those conversations. And that's part of the whole reclaiming your true self.
Sure. I certainly, I'd go back. Lion's mane is non-psychoactive. It's
Sure, of course.
mushroom. Yeah, I just want to clear that up. And the thing is that when I discuss it with my patients, I say, I'm leaving it up to you. I'm a consultant. You've come to me to work through your healthcare and your medications. I don't in my practice, I don't dispense any medications. I just make recommendations. And then if it comes down to a prescribed medication, I work with the prescriber to see, if it's inappropriate or if the dose can be changed to be more effective or experience less side effects. That's really what I do. But, when I discuss it with my patients, there are some medications that do interact with different mushrooms, lion's mane, and things like that. Generally, your anticoagulants, depending, which doesn't necessarily make them unusable. You just have to be smarter with the dosing and make your patient aware, like, hey, if you're having nosebleeds, you might want to cut these off. So the thing is it's just a mushroom. It's a food that you would eat. You could buy it at the store. So not necessarily going to cause too many drug interactions or harm. It's relatively, benign as far as a side effect profile. I don't really think I've had any of my patients be like, this, has me with all kind of side effects. So it's just one of those things that, it's like food. It's just food you eat. And there's a huge component to our food being our medicine. There's so much processed food and sugar and stuff out there that are truly villainous for our bodies. And just getting people, awake into more whole foods. That's it. The less processing it has, probably the better for you. There's a lot more nutrients. And with that too comes probably a better outlook on life and things like that. Eating whole foods, the sugar and, the sugar crashes, the processed food, all that stuff can create some mental health crashes. People might think it's kind of crazy or dumb, but it's so true. There's a huge problem with processed food consumption, fast food consumption in the US, and our gut is a huge portion of our mental health, believe it or not. There a lot of our really important neurotransmitters are produced in our gut. And if you're putting crap in there, you're going to pretty much get crap out. The you are what you eat has lasted this long for a reason, right?
I love all of that. And I love the we talk a lot in our space about how we talk about our gut reaction and our body. We know when we have emotions, and we're kind of not taught to really listen to those emotions. Part of what we talk about in the integration world is your emotions in many cases are a unprocessed thought. It's your body telling you something before you've realized what it's trying to say. And slowing down and being aware of our emotions and thinking, why is my body reacting in whatever way it's reacting to whatever's happening, and trying to figure out what that thought is a really great practice. And it is interesting, Patrick, how again we talk about these psychedelic medicines. This is, again, you're doing these little touch points of psychedelic medicines, but most of the practice following it is all the things you're talking about. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough water? Are you eating whole foods? Are you listening to your emotions? Are you taking time for yourself? Are you establishing boundaries? Are you getting exercise? All of these things that we've known. I think the psychedelic technology for some people is the catalyst needed to get from, oh, I've been told what to do, to I know what to do. Hugely powerful.
Right. And I will say that on our previous podcast, and it kind of goes into your slogan of reclaiming your true self, is that the people that we've discussed these treatments with do say sometimes, I don't know if this is like the bad trip, quote unquote, but it does make you look inward, and you do have to find some answers internally. And when you really start talking about the discussion of even going to see a mental health professional, a good mental health professional or a therapist or someone like that is not going to tell you how to live your life, because they can't. The good mental health professional is going to help you explore your options and you find what internally really works. And I think that is what's so important to kind of clear up with even these psychedelic treatments, with even going just for some simple talk therapy or mental health counseling. Those professionals are there to help guide you to your answer, not their answer or anyone else's answer. And I think that that might be what one of the advantages of psychedelic therapy could be, is that it's kind of almost forcing you to take that inward journey to help find those answers. Would you, kind of agree,
Patrick,
feel a certain
100%,
kind of way?
Patrick. Yeah, I mean, you can meditate for years and not and constantly be distracted. You take a large dose of psilocybin, and you're going to have an inward journey that's going to be, at the very least, powerful. Um, it's interesting. We've spent most of this conversation on the medical use of psychedelics in America, and I think that's great. And many people who have a diagnosis or are looking for a medical solution find their way to psychedelics through the medicalization. Super important. There is also another path, which is kind of the spiritual path. People who believe that psychedelics are sacraments, and that by taking this medicine, you are connecting to a higher power, however it is that that person defines it, and that that medicine helps them look inward at themselves and outward towards this higher power. And then that combination is a powerful combination moving forward. So for a number of people, they might not think of themselves as depressed or with, again, a diagnosis, but they're like, I know I'm missing something in my life. I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to talk to a shrink. Okay, that's okay. But I do want to connect with a higher power. I do want to look inside myself. And I think those people are finding themselves either in the, what I would call the underground religious freedom psychedelic churches here in America, or they're doing the psychedelic tourism. They're flying to Costa Rica, Peru, Jamaica, Bahamas, Mexico, the Netherlands, and taking these I don't know, optimization type of psychedelic experiences. Um, and again, looking deeply within, what is the source of my unhappiness, or the source of my the masks that I'm wearing, or the source of this behavior? And what happens if I remove that source, and how do I move forward? And I think that that spiritual path, the spiritual path to reclaiming your true self, is an incredibly beautiful and important path, and needs to be recognized alongside of the medical path. So we have the medical path and the legalization that's happening, and then we have the decriminalization and this kind of First Amendment movement that's happening on the spiritual path. To very that can be an and they can work together. The spiritual path can do better at getting medical intakes and informed consents and learning from the medical community, and the medical community can learn from the spiritual leaders who have held this medicine for thousands of years. And certainly during the last 50, when there was a prohibition, they didn't stop practicing. They were just extremely quiet. So there's lessons on both sides for both pieces of the way that people are going to access psychedelics to learn from.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really important component. I believe that a lot of, especially we can kind of touch on the American component, is there's so many different institutions and dichotomies and all these areas that create a lot of internal conflict with people. I mean, they want, we don't get political really on the podcast too much because there's a lot of differing views, but you can see that there's one party wants you to vote one way and they have all these hot button issues on their side, but someone might feel, really strongly about a topic the other party represents, and they have these very conflicting dichotomies of one or the other. And I think that that's just one example. I mean, there's plenty of examples in society that people could pick out where they're they're told to lean one way, but they feel it another way, whether it be with religion or politics or life or anything. And it creates this internal conflict. And it sounds like some of these therapies can really help people dive deep into some of these issues that they feel very strongly about, kind of help them come up with just stronger realizations and become more, you know, for lack of a better term, you become more of who you are and more accepting of who you are as a person, which I can see would really help people who are, you know, experiencing some mental health issues or conflicts, because you kind of determine a path that's right for you, and now you can kind of start walking that path and realize what resources are out there to help get on that journey.
That's well said. That is, yeah, well said, period.
Thank you. So I did want to kind of talk about, you know, as we wind up a little bit, but what are some of the difference between some of these spiritual practices? So like if we're, you know, talking about the, I believe you called it like psychedelic tourism, where they're traveling to different countries where these practices are a little bit more commonplace and partaking. So what would be the difference between that really versus what seems like kind of a sterile kind of treatment in the medical field? It's like they lay you down on a bed, they give you an injection, you wait for 2 hours, like we discussed before, and kind of what I've seen in before my practice, but in school with ketamine therapy. But so, you know, one is like very seemingly very shamanistic. The other one is very rigid and medical. You know, what are the differences? And you know, I would probably have to say people are going to have to find what works for them. But you know, let's kind of dive into these a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. It's all about finding what works for you. So I think the questions are the same, whether it's a medical practitioner or a ceremonial practitioner. How are you going to take care of me? What's going to be the preparation? What does the day itself look like? What's going to be the integration? If it's going to be a group process, how many people are going to be in here in whatever group I'm doing? How many people are going to be staff and taking care of us? If something goes wrong, what do you do? Asking those questions is just the smart thing to do, period. And I'm going to use the ayahuasca world for a moment. There's a very well-known ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica where it's typically 80 to 100 people at a time in those ceremonies. Again, a lot of staff, a number of people serving the medicine or serving the sacrament in that case, but it's 80 to 100 people. So if you don't know to ask how many people, you wouldn't know what it's going to be. There's other well-known ones that are 40 people. And there's other well-known ones that are 20 people. So what are you looking for? Are you looking for a big group and kind of more of a resort experience where there's activities and things all around it? Then maybe you want the 80 to 100. You're looking for a small, intimate group where you have a lot of time to share. Maybe the 20 is better for you. Ketamine's offered both individually and in group here in the States. So it's, again, ask those questions. Most of these psychedelic medicines are physically safe. So it's not that you're going to have an adverse, for the most part, an adverse reaction to the psychedelic. But what people need to know is that life happens all the time. So if life happens while on a psychedelic, it's just more complicated. So asking, what do you do if? What do you do if someone has just a life event while on a psychedelic? So do you have an emergency procedure? Are there any medical staff at all in the room? Do you have people who are sober who can handle the situation? If you have a person who's having a really challenging psychedelic experience, do you have someone who can sit with that person individually if they need that level of care? So again, that's true whether it's legal ketamine or whether it's ceremonial. And then when it comes to the difference, what are you looking for? If you're looking for a medical experience, then having an MD or some type of medical professional in the room for you might be very important. If you're looking for more of that ceremonial feel, I want a spiritual person. I want someone with a yogi background or a Hindu background or a Colombian indigenous culture background. Then who's leading the room? And then what does that look like? Are there smokes? Are there sounds? Are there things that that they're going to, drums and different things that they're going to incorporate into it, just so you're aware of what you're walking into. If they do have strong beliefs that they are sharing, what are those beliefs? If they are just creating a container, a ceremonial container for you to develop your own beliefs, that's great to know as well. So again, just asking the questions in advance. Many people, I think, are looking for the ceremonial experience, and they're trying to find that right provider. A couple other things I would ask: are there men and women facilitating in the same ceremony? Typically, that's a best practice. Whether again that's legal ketamine, whether that's how the MDMA trials are run, or whether it's ceremonial, or is it just one ceremonial leader? So asking those questions. Asking questions about the music. Do you give me a playlist? Do I bring my own music? Do you have live musicians? Again, just so you know, and you cut down on the surprises. So these are all kind of best practices. But there is a difference between what a ceremonial psychedelic experience feels like when people are expressing their sincere religious beliefs and using these sacraments that have been around for a long time, than what a medical container feels like. And again, there's no wrong with either choice. Just what are you looking for? And it's out there for you, regardless. You can find it. It's out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this is something that we greatly agree with on the podcast, is you have to do what's right for you. I mean, I think that there are so many people on the internet and out there just saying how people should live. And we do not believe that, because just knowing as pharmacists, seeing our patient populations and with our own background, I think that so many people are so very different, and not every diet, lifestyle, even psychedelic experience is going to work the same for everyone. And you have to really consider what's realistic for you and what can you do for yourself. Not worry about what anybody else and you can take people's opinions and advice for sure, but not really taking it up as like, oh, well, this person said I should do this. Well, I don't really know if that's going to work for me. Then don't do it. I mean, it's just that easy, and you're welcome to try. But if you already know out of the gate, like, that's not going to work for me, that kind of goes against what I'm doing, then it would kind of be best to stay away from that.
Yeah, I think the core of the psychedelic experience, at least in the way I'm practicing, is everybody has an innate wisdom, innate beauty, and knows what's best for them. And this process helps them remember that, and then take control of their lives in every aspect of their lives. But this is the integration process is not, you're going to tell me what happened and I'm going to tell you what it means. Nope. I'm just going to ask you questions and keep reminding you of what you're telling me as you figure out what do you want for whatever it is that you're about to embark on. But you have that wisdom and that power, and you don't need to give your agency up to anybody. And in fact, unprogramming all of the programming is a big piece of this. I don't need to please my parents. I don't need to do things to please my spouse or my partner. This is my life. This is my one chance in this body on this planet. And how am I going to make the most of it for me? And only you know that.
That's couldn't have said it better myself, Matt. So any last tips and tricks for seeking out psychedelic therapy or an experience that we did not discuss today that you care to disclose with our audience?
I think we've covered. I mean, if you're looking for legal medical psychedelics in America, type in ketamine near me on your Google and then start asking questions. There's lots of providers, or do ketamine telehealth and again ask the questions. If you're looking for a more ceremonial, either ask around people who appear to understand maybe how to do this and can help guide you. There's a lot of friendly people out there. Or look at the different resorts and retreat centers that are international. And again, ask those questions. Look at their site, ask those questions. You have lots of options. There's no fear of missing out. There's plenty of options. Take your time. This is a big decision, and figure out what's right for you. But I think there's plenty of people there who are further down the path who, if you can get to them and ask the questions, they're absolutely willing to help you.
That's fantastic. So Matt, where can our audience find you? And I will definitely put that into the description of the podcast below. So if you guys are listening and care to find Matt, his book, or any of the other awesome things he's doing with these type of therapies, we will have that accessible to you. So fire off.
I appreciate that very much. So Psychedelics for Everyone is my book, and that's available really anywhere that books are sold. So you can do it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Apple. There's an Audible book available as well. My website is mattzemon.com, and that's all when people are looking for speaking engagements and things like that. That's a great place to find me. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn, Instagram. And if you have a question, or if there's some way I can help, feel free to drop me a line through any of those, either the mattzemon.com, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I do my best to get back to everybody who asks questions.
Well, that's awesome, Matt. And thank you so much for taking the time and providing this really important education to our audience as these therapies start to come more to the forefront in America and all over the world. So thank you again. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Patrick, I would love that. Thanks for the questions today.